clear that up right quick. So now let's talk about fractions. Okay, so fractions. Adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. Talk about fractions. Okay, so adding fractions, in order to add fractions, we must have a common denominator, meaning the denominators must be the same. Okay? And then when we add fractions, we only add the numerator, which is the top number. The denominator is the bottom number. So let's look at a couple of fractions that have the same denominator, or the bottom number. Let's say we have 2 7 plus 3 7ths. Our answer, the 7 stays the same, and we're going to end up with 5 7ths. Okay? So if they have the same denominator, common denominator, we only add the numerators, which is the top number. Okay? But what if we have numbers that don't have the same denominator? So let's look at 1/4 plus 2/5. Okay? Well, you would be tempted to add the tops and the bottoms, but that will be incorrect. So in order to add these, we have to get a common denominator. And this is how we do a common denominator. We write the numbers vertically on top of the others so we can see. We have to change them, and then we can add them. So let's look at our numbers. Let's see all the multiples of 5. So that's your 5 times tables. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. Let's go for 30. Okay. And now let's look at the 4s. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32. All right? Now we can look to see, when you're looking at the multiples or the times tables, what do they have in common? So the first one they have in common is this 20. Okay? So that means that our common denominator is 20. That's the first number that they have in common. All right? So we know what our denominator is going to look like. It's going to be a 20. So we have to change the numerator to match. Well, we say, well, how do we get from a 5 to a 20? We multiplied by 4. And with fractions, whatever you do to the denominator, the bottom number, you must also do to the numerator, the top number. So we have to multiply that one by 4. And that gave us 8 over 20. Same thing up here. We multiply by 5 to get 20. Whatever we do at the bottom, the denominator, we do the top numerator, and that will give us 5. We add that together, and that gives us 13 over 20. Again, when we're adding them, once they have the same denominator, the denominator stays the same, and we only add the numerators. Okay? So that is a common denominator. So let's look at another case of common denominators. Everybody understand this so far? Let's look at another case. All right, so let's look at, let's do 5, 6 plus 3/4. Okay, so again, we have to get a common denominator. So we do 5 over 6, 3 over 4. And again, we do the same thing, the 6 times tables. 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32. And we go on forever. Now I want to show you 2 things. Remember when we did the 5s, we ended up with, we had 5 and 4, we ended up with 20, right? It went the other way, right? Coincidentally, 4 times 5 equals 20. So to find a common denominator, you can always just multiply the 2 together. So 6 times 4 is 24. So that means that we know 24 is a common denominator. You can always find a common denominator by multiplying the two together. But what we want is we want the least common denominator, which is the first number or the smallest number that they have in common. And in this case, that is 12. Well, it would be if that green marker worked. That's 12. Okay? So we could use this one, but if we use this one, we have to reduce it later. We have to get it to its lowest terms. So we're not going to use the larger one, we're going to use the smaller one, all right? So we use 12 here, 12 here, 4 times 3 equals 12. Whatever we do the denominator, we do the numerator. Times 3 is 9. 6 times 2 times 2, that equals 10. We add them together, we end up with 19. We end up with 19 over 12. Okay? Now, sometimes in the CAHSEE, you'll end up with what's called an improper fraction. It doesn't mean it's rude. Hilarious. Improper just means the top number is bigger than the bottom number. Now, sometimes they'll leave it like this. Other times they want you to turn it into a mixed number. And to turn it into a mixed number, we simply divide the denominator into the numerator. Okay? 12 goes into 19 one time. Right? 7. And we can't go any further, so our answer is 1 7/12. Okay. So on the CAHSEE, you may end up with either this number or this number. It just depends. So you have to look at the question. Sometimes they'll put some impropers and mixed in there, so you have to double check to make sure that you have the right one. So that's how you do common denominators. Now the great thing about fractions is it works the same way for subtraction. All right? So if you understand how to do the adding of fraction, it works the exact same way with subtraction. So let's do a couple of those. Anybody have any questions on this? All right. Let's do this. Okay, so we'll do a straightforward one first. Let's do 3 over 4 minus 2/3. Okay? Again, we can just multiply it out, or we can double check to make sure that that is the least common. So we'll double check and see. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 20. All right? And 12 is the first one. Okay. So again, we'll write it vertically, so that they're right on top of each other so we can see it. 3 times 4 will give you 12. Whatever you do to the bottom, the denominator, do the top, the numerator. Okay? Times 3 times 3 goes to 9. We subtract, that gives us 1/12. Because again, once we have a common denominator, the operation is only on the numerator. 9 minus 8 gives you a 1. Okay? So once you get a common denominator, you just operate on the top. Okay? Any questions on that one? All right? Let's do another one. All right, so let's do 1/8 minus 5/6. Okay? All right, again, we could just multiply them together, 8 times 6 to get 48, but let's 6, 12, 18, 4, 30, 36. Now, if you don't know your times tables by heart, you can always get them by just adding. See, we added 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8, 6, and we added 6, and we added 6, and we added 6, we added 6, and we added 6. So if you don't know your timetables by heart, all you have to do is just keep adding until you come up with a number. Makes it easier. All right? So here, we look here, our first number is 24. I mean, we could have gone on to 48, but again, we want smaller numbers so we don't have to reduce. Okay? So we have 1 over 8 minus 5 over 6 equals, and we said it was 24, it was 24. 8 times 3, oh, notice, 8 times 1, 8 times 2, 8 times 3. So as you're doing this, you're also giving yourself the answer. So 8 times 3, because there are 3 of them, will give you 24. So if you don't remember, you can just count that way as well. And then 6 would be 6 times 1, 6 times 2, 6 times 3, 6 times 4. That gives us 20. Uh-oh, we have 3 minus 20. What shall we do? We have a negative number. Remember, going back to our number line, we're starting here, we're starting here. This is 0, we're starting here at 3. Okay? That means I'm going to take away 20. So from 3 to 0, that's my first 3. I've got 17 left to go. That'll give me negative 17 over 24. Now you could count it if you wanted to. If you don't remember, you go 1, 2, 3, here, 17. You could count it that way if you want. You could do it that way if you don't remember offhand. Okay? But that's the key. Common denominator. Your denominator is fixed. You choose your denominator, you calculate your numerator, and then you subtract your numerator. Or in the addition case, we just add the numerators. Any questions? All right. We love fractions. You guys say, I love math this morning? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Remember that. You got to remember, as far as math goes, you cannot be good at something that you hate. So, every morning, you have to say, I love math. Because if you say, I love math, then you will love math. Because if you think about all the things that you love, you're good at. The things that you hate, not so much. So every morning when you wake up, you say, I love math. I love math. Draw little math hearts. Post that on your Twitter or your Facebook. Text it to all your friends. I love math. And once you love math, then math will be your friend. Because I love math. All right, let's talk about multiplying fractions. Multiplying fractions is pretty straightforward. We multiply top times top, numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator, and that becomes pretty straightforward. So let's do 4/7 times 3/5. 4 times 3 is equal to 12. 7 times 5 is equal to 35. You just multiply across. Yes, gotcha, okay. Because we can't reduce it. We could end up with something like this. Let's say we had 3/8 times 2/5. That would give us 3 times 2 is 6 over 40. Thus, we would have to reduce. Now, when we reduce, we put it into lowest terms. We ask ourselves, what numbers can we divide into the top and into the bottom evenly? Okay. So in this instance, we know 6 is equal to 1 times 6, 3 times 2. So we have to look at 6 and say, all right, 1, 6, 3, and 2. But we know 1 goes into everything, so we don't even bother with that. 6 does not go into 40. 3 does not go into 40, but 2 does go into 40. So 2 goes into 40, and 2 goes into 6. Okay, and then we can divide that. That'll give us 3 over 20. Now, the other thing we can do is we can cross-cancel. All right? Now, the benefit of cross-canceling is it's easier to see what numbers go into each other when you're first multiplying. I mean, you can do it here, but again, you have to go through and look at all the possibilities. But here, we can look and say, let's look diagonally. Are there any numbers that go into 3 and 5 besides 1? Oh, no. Are there any numbers that go into 2 and 8? 2. 2 divided by 2 will give me a 1. 4 divided by 2, 8 divided by 2 will give me a 4. And that's going to give me 3 over 20. Same answer.
So it's easier to cross multiply than.
Yeah, cross cancel. Cross multiply is different, but yes, it's easier to cross cancel because it's easier to see it. Here, you would have to remember. Here, you can actually see it because the numbers are usually smaller. Okay. Either way will get you your answer. And again, on the CAHSEE, it's an untimed test, so you don't care which one gets you your answer. You just want to get the right answer. Okay. Any questions on this? All right. Now, let us talk about dividing fractions. But before we talk about dividing fractions, let's talk about how multiplication and division are related to each other, because that might make it a little bit easier to see. Okay. So if I have 10 and I say, what is half of 10? You would tell me 5, right? Right? Half of 10 is 5, yes? So half of 10, 10 times 1/2 is equal to 5. Coincidentally, actually it's not coincidence, by design, 10 divided by 2 is equal to 5. Okay, so what we learned is dividing is the same as inverting or flipping and multiplying. Okay, so we take the reciprocal and multiply. So 10 divided by 2 is the same as 10 times 1/2. And 2 and 1/2 are reciprocals. So that means anytime we divide by a fraction, the same rule applies. We multiply by the reciprocal, okay? Which means you flip it upside down. So if I have 3/4 divided by 2/5, I'm going to flip the second number, the one that we're dividing by, 3/4 times 5/2, which gives us 15/8. We can either leave it like this, or we can turn it into a mixed number, which means 8 goes into 15. It goes in there one time. 7, 1 and 7, 8. So either one of these could be your possible answer, but you would see. So we flipped the second number, just like dividing by 2 is the same as multiplying by 1/2, which is the reciprocal, because 2 is actually 2/1, just like 3 is equal to 3/1. Any number, we can just stick a 1 underneath it. Flipping it, it becomes 1/2, and we multiply. So the same rule applies for any fraction, no matter what it is. So if I have this, 8 divided by 4/3 would be 8 times 3/4. And again, we can just put a 1 underneath that. And we can cross cancel here if we wanted to, right? 4 goes into itself one time, 4 goes into 8 two times. We end up with 6. Does that make sense? Okay, so the key with dividing fractions, we flip the second number and multiply. We take the reciprocal. Okay? Any questions? All right. So those are our fraction indicators. Now, we'll cover 2 more things in fractions. What if I had something like this? 3 3/8 divided by 2 1/3. Well, how would I flip that? I would be so confused. But because I love math, my relationship with math would tell me I'm going to convert this from a mixed number to an improper fraction first. And the way we do that is the opposite of the way we got there. This time we multiply the denominator, which is the bottom number, times the whole number, and then we add the numerator. So the denominator will stay the same. Here we do 8 times 3, which is 24, plus 3, which is 27, divided by, we do the same thing here. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7. All right, so all we did was just convert these from improper fractions, from mixed numbers to improper fractions. Now we can do our inversion, and then we can just multiply top times top and bottom times bottom. Okay, so whenever you're giving a mixed number, usually it's best just to convert it. Now you don't have to do that when you're adding. When you're adding, you could add fractions and whole numbers, but the problem is remembering how to carry, and I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, so if we had mixed numbers, and again, multiplication, division, if we're multiplying these, we would do the same thing, except we would flip. We could turn it into an improper fraction. But if you're adding or subtracting, it gets kind of complicated. So you can do it this way, so I'll give you two examples that make it a little bit easier. So if I had 2 1/3 plus 3 1/4, right? I can then add them, add up 2 1/3, 3 1/4. The only thing I have to convert are the fractions. The whole numbers stay the same. We already know that that's going to be a 12 times 3 times 3, which is 3, times 4 times 4, which is 4. Okay, so we leave the whole numbers alone. We ignore them. We find our common denominator, which is 12. We convert our numerators, and then we can add. And so that would give us 7 12s, and then we can add this, which would give us 5 and 7 12s. And that works because it's pretty straightforward, all right? But sometimes you end up with some really kind of crazy numbers like 5 5 6 plus 2 3/4, okay? And then we would write those vertically again. 2 3/4. We remember from before that our common denominator is 12. Okay, again, it can ignore this guy. That's going to give us 10 because 6 times 2 is 12. 5 times 2 is 10. Times 3 times 3. That's going to give us 9. And we're going to add that, and we're going to end up with 19 over 12 and 2. So that is a mixed improper fraction. And you can solve this because you would simply turn this into its own improper fraction. I mean, its own mixed number. Goes into there. So we end up with 1 and 7 12. We got that whole number 1 to this whole number 1, 3 and 7 12. But that's hard to remember. We can simply convert this into improper fractions and then do one conversion at the end. So 6 times 5 is 30 plus 5 is 35 over 6 plus 4 times 2 is 8 plus 3 is 11 over 4. And then we can do our same thing, finding a common denominator. And we don't have to do this conversion twice. We only have to do it once at the end. Either way works, whatever you're most comfortable with. When you start subtracting, it's really hard because you have to borrow a whole number, and that's kind of hard to do. So my recommendation is when you're dealing with mixed numbers, turn them into improper fractions and then turn them back into mixed numbers if you need to. It makes it a lot easier to work with. The other way you can do, but if you ended up having a lower number here, you'd end up with a negative fraction and then a positive whole number, and then you have to combine them, and then you're in the middle of the CAHSEE, you start to panic, you start to go, oh my God, don't do that. Go with what works. Because remember, the whole point of the CAHSEE is to see if you can pass the CAHSEE. It is not a measure of anything other than whether you can pass it or not. No one's going to go, hey, you did it this way. Nah, no one cares. They only look at the answer. So when you're on the CAHSEE, you want to make it as easy as possible. Everybody with me? All right. Now, the other thing that you can do that I wanted to tell you is sometimes you may end up with more than 2 fractions. So, but the rules still apply. So even if you had 2/3 plus 1/5 plus 5/8, it works the exact same way. We can have 100 numbers. Again, you want to find the common denominator, but this time you're not looking at 3. I mean, looking at 2, you're looking at 3. So again, you would do 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, and so forth. Okay? And then you would do the same thing for 5 and the same thing for 3 until you found one that had all 3 numbers. So you do it the exact same way. And then you go from left to right. Okay, any questions?